It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. I'd heard Willow Creek Winery was the place to unwind. Beautiful vineyards, top-notch wine, and a rustic farmhouse that had been converted into a bed and breakfast. But I should have known better than to trust a flyer I found in a dusty old thrift store. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun already sinking behind the rolling hills. The place looked abandoned, the only sign of life being an older man who introduced himself as Henry, the caretaker. "Ah, Miss Emma, we've been expecting you," he said, handing me an antique brass key. "You're the only guest this weekend." That should have been a red flag, but I brushed it off. The inside of the farmhouse was charming, filled with vintage furniture and framed photographs of people I assumed were the original owners. I took my stuff up to my room, deciding to take a quick nap before exploring. When I woke up, the room was colder than before, like a chill had settled over the place. That's when I noticed it, the painting on the wall opposite my bed, a dark landscape featuring a gnarled tree under a stormy sky. Something about it creeped me out, but I convinced myself it was just old-fashioned taste. I decided to take a walk through the vineyards, maybe even take some photos. The setting sun cast long shadows, transforming the vines into twisted shapes that seemed to move when I wasn't looking. I shook off the uneasy feeling and snapped some pictures, telling myself I was just being silly. Heading back, I figured a glass of wine would calm my nerves. Henry was in the wine cellar when I found him, moving barrels around. He didn't hear me come in, and for a moment, I observed him. He seemed to be muttering something, but it wasn't until he shifted one of the barrels that I saw what he was hiding. A carved symbol on the floor, something that looked ancient and definitely out of place. I cleared my throat and he nearly jumped out of his skin. "Oh, Miss Emma, you startled me. Care for a glass of our finest red?" He poured me a glass, avoiding my eyes. The wine was excellent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I thanked Henry and made my way back to my room, locking the door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The painting seemed to grow darker, the tree more menacing. When I finally did doze off, I had the strangest dream. I was walking through the vineyard, but it was night, and the vines seemed to come alive, reaching for me. I heard whispers all around, incomprehensible but full of malice. Then I woke up, gasping for air, convinced it was just a nightmare. I decided to leave first thing in the morning, but when I tried to start my car, the engine just sputtered and died. Henry appeared out of nowhere, offering to take a look. After some tinkering, he claimed it was the battery and said he could drive me to the nearest town to buy a new one. Reluctantly, I agreed. But as we drove down the winding roads, he began to speak. "This land has been in my family for generations, but it's not like any other vineyard. The soil is cursed, you see. We've tried to appease it, keep it at bay, but it demands more." I was freaked out, but tried to keep my composure. "What are you saying, Henry?" "We're almost there," he said, pulling into a rundown gas station. "Why don't you go pick out a battery? I'll wait here." I got out, glad for the chance to escape. But as soon as I stepped into the shop, I knew something was wrong. The shopkeeper looked at me and shook his head, mouthing the word, "Go." I didn't need to be told twice. I ran back to the car, but Henry was gone. Panicked, I hopped into the driver's seat, and miraculously, the car started. I sped back to the winery to grab my stuff, my heart pounding the whole way. When I got there, the front door was wide open. I dashed up to my room, grabbed my bag, and ran back to my car. Just as I was about to speed off, I saw Henry in my rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the road, holding something that looked like a twisted vine. He was chanting something, and for a split second, I felt an overwhelming urge to go back. But then I floored it, leaving Henry and Willow Creek Winery in the dust. To this day, I don't know what Henry was trying to do, and I don't care to find out. I never went back, and I definitely stopped picking places to visit based on random flyers. But the worst part? When I developed the photos from that day, every single picture of the vineyard was pitch black except for one. It showed the twisted tree from the painting, but this time, it looked like someone or something was hanging from one of its branches.
Man, I can't even begin to tell you how stoked I was when Rob suggested a weekend getaway at Hollow Vineyard. A winery, endless rows of grapes, and that old rustic charm. Sign me up. We were a group of 4 buddies. Me, Rob, Sarah, and Mike. We'd known each other since high school and had been through thick and thin. This was supposed to be a chill break from our hectic lives. The drive was smooth and filled with laughter. Sarah even made a playlist that she proudly called Winery Vibes. We arrived at sunset. The vineyard looked like a postcard, all bathed in that golden hour glow. But when we saw the house we'd be staying in, it was different. It was old, kind of run down, and gave off a weird vibe. Rob noticed our hesitant faces and said, "Come on, guys, it's just for a couple of nights. It'll be fun." We shrugged it off. But Sarah, always the intuitive one, gave the house a wary look before walking in. The first few hours were great. We opened a bottle of wine from the vineyard, toasted to friendship, and played some board games. Yet, every now and then, I'd catch a draft of cold air, or hear a creak that didn't quite fit with the house settling. Sarah and Mike felt it too. Only Rob seemed oblivious, lost in the adventure of it all. "Hey guys, let's take a night stroll through the vineyard. It'll be like a real adventure," Rob suggested. It was a clear night, and the moon was full. We all agreed, put on our jackets, and grabbed some flashlights. As we walked, the vineyard looked surreal under the moonlight, like a maze of dark, twisted vines. We were about 10 minutes into our walk when Mike, who was leading us, suddenly stopped. "Hey, do you guys hear that?" We listened. There was a faint whispering, a rustling among the grapevines, as if they were sharing secrets with the wind. Sarah clutched my arm. "Let's go back," she said. "Yeah, man, this is kind of freaking me out," I agreed. But Rob laughed. "You guys can't be serious. All right, you can head back if you want. I'm going to keep exploring." We tried to talk him out of it, but Rob was stubborn. We watched as his flashlight receded into the dark maze of vines. "We should have gone with him," Mike said as we headed back. "We tried, man." "You know how Rob is," I replied. We got back to the house, but sleep was hard to come by. I kept waking up, feeling like I was being watched. Sarah felt it too. I could hear her tossing and turning in the room next door. Morning came, and there was no sign of Rob. We searched the vineyard, shouting his name until our voices were hoarse. Nothing. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. Frustrated and scared, we went to the local sheriff's office. They looked at us skeptically, but agreed to search the vineyard. They didn't find anything either. Not even a footprint. That evening, we were all gathered in the living room, trying to make sense of things, when the front door creaked open, slowly. In walked Rob, covered in dirt and leaves. "Where have you been, man? We've been freaking out!" Mike yelled. Rob looked different, his eyes empty. "I don't know," he mumbled. "I can't remember." None of us wanted to stay another minute. We packed our bags and left, vowing never to speak of this weekend again. Weeks later, Sarah called me. "Have you talked to Rob?" "Not since that weekend." "Why?" "He's acting strange, distant, and he's been going back to that vineyard every weekend." As she said this, a chill ran down my spine. Something happened to Rob that night, something we didn't understand. But whatever it was still calling him, luring him back to the haunting maze of Hollow Vineyard. And the scariest part? Sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the vines whispering, like a distant echo in my mind, and I wonder what secrets they hold. What did they show Rob? And what would have happened if we'd all stayed that night? All I know is that I'm never going back to find out. Let me tell you, I never believed in ghosts, ghouls, or whatever things that go bump in the night. That was until I took that job at Del Monte Winery. I needed the money, okay? They offered good pay for some late-night supervision of the fermentation vats during the harvest season. The first few nights were a breeze, just me, the giant steel vats, and the smell of fermenting grapes. Around the fourth night, though, things started getting weird. I was in the main fermentation room, jotting down some readings, when I heard a knock. A knock, I swear, on the vat next to me. You ever hear metal knocking? It sounds kinda hollow, like a drum that lost its beat. I checked the pressure valves and gauges. Everything was normal. I shrugged it off as some kind of pressure release thing. What do I know? I'm no winemaker, just a guy trying to make a buck. But then, a few minutes later, I heard a whisper. Couldn't make out what it was saying, but it was as if someone was trying to tell me something in a voice too low to hear. Now, I'm a practical guy. I yelled out, thinking maybe it was Jerry, the old caretaker. That guy was ancient, like biblical, but he had a good sense of humor. "Hey Jerry, that you, man?" Silence. Not even a mouse squeak. A little spooked, I wrapped up my work, hit the lights, and hightailed it to the little office where I clocked in and out. Sat there for a while, trying to shake off the creeps. Then, around midnight, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I picked it up, and a raspy voice said, "The vines remember." Click. The call ended. I'm not gonna lie, I was about ready to clock out right there and call it quits. But rent was due, and this job paid well. I decided to check the cameras before heading back to the vats, and there it was on the grainy monitor. A shadow, standing next to the vat I had heard the knocking from. A tall, thin figure. Then, it faded, like melted into the air. I checked the timestamp. It was just a minute ago. My heart was pounding like crazy, but I convinced myself it was just a glitch, a trick of the light or something. I walked back to the main room, every step heavier than the last, took a deep breath, and turned on the lights. Nothing. Just the vats, looking as harmless as ever. Maybe I was imagining things, you know? Stress and late hours can mess with you. So, I got back to my routine, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching me. It was getting late or early, depending on how you look at it, and I was wrapping up when I heard a loud crash from the storage room, like glass shattering loud. I went over, ready to find a raccoon making a mess or something. But what I found was worse. A wine barrel had toppled over, spilling its contents. And let me tell you, that wine didn't look like any wine I'd ever seen. It was darker, almost like blood, forming a puddle on the floor. That's when I heard it again, clearer this time. The whisper, right behind me. "The vines remember." I turned around, expecting to see someone, anyone. But there was no one. I stood there, frozen, when I heard footsteps coming from the direction of the fermentation room. Slow, deliberate footsteps. I had two choices: run or investigate. Any sane person would have bolted, but for some reason, I felt compelled to find out what was happening. Like the answer was right there, within my grasp. I followed the footsteps back to the main room, my hand gripping a metal rod I had picked up from the storage room. I turned on the lights, expecting to catch whoever, or whatever, was messing with me. The room was empty, just as I had left it. But one of the vat's pressure gauges was going nuts, the needle swinging back and forth. And just when I thought things couldn't get any weirder, the vat burst open, spewing that dark, almost bloody wine all over the place. I was about to nope out of there when I saw it, a face forming in the spilled wine, a twisted, tormented face that looked vaguely human. It mouthed something, and this time I heard the words loud and clear. "The vines remember. We remember." I ran, faster than I've ever run before, all the way to the office, clocked out, and never looked back. They could keep their money. I was done. Later, I found out that the Delmont Winery was built on an old burial ground, which was uprooted to plant the vineyards. Talk about the stuff of nightmares. The winery closed down shortly after my experience. Something about unforeseen complications with the harvest. Yeah, right. And me? Let's just say I stick to beer these days. I've had enough wine to last me a lifetime, especially from a vineyard that remembers.